Hello everyone, welcome to the course on Health Humanities, Indian and Western Medical Knowledge Traditions. This is lecture number 14 on Materia Medica, Classical Works of Indian Pharmacology. In this lecture, I will discuss about some of the important medicants, medical practitioners, healers, and their important works, and how they have contributed to Indian pharmacy and how they have developed the entire concept of Ayurveda. So in this lecture, I will talk about medicines in ancient India and their status, their roles, and how they have been seen and how they have been practiced, and what other people think about them. Then I'll look at some of the Western works and Western commentaries on Indian medical traditions, Indian medicines, Indian medical practices. Then I'll move to the history of medicine, and then I'll focus on some of the important medical works. I'll talk about their authors, and then the texts, but I'll go in detail the two texts. So when we think about medicines in ancient India, they are not properly documented. They lack documentations, and most of them are in Sanskrit and are scattered at different places in the form of manuscripts. When we think about one of the greatest Sanskrit scholars from the West, William Jones, and despite his all appreciation for the texts in Sanskrit, he did not consider Indian medical texts worth of studying. Though he did mention to examine the Indian medical texts, but later on he changes his mind and says that I found no evidence that in any language of Asia there exists one medical treatise on medicine considered as science. So in a way, Jones disregards the Indian medical traditions, and he says that they are not worth considering. However, the medical works and medical texts in Sanskrit in Indian languages are very vast, and when one actually documents them, translates them, and maybe writes commentaries, it can provide a new understanding of medical literatures in India. It can provide a new understanding of medical history in India. These medical texts provide special proficiency in surgery and how to carry out different surgeries. It talks about the instruments, tools of surgery. And then the medical system also talks about the observations, origin, and diagnosis of disease, and how they can help in curing and treating. When we think about the commentaries of Professor Wilson and Professor Royle, they actually validate the originality and antiquity of Indian medicines, and then they suggest that they are one of the most developed scientific treatises on the medical systems. Some of the Western works which have been done on Indian medical traditions are by Friedrich Reinhold, who wrote Analecta Medica. And in his book Analecta Medica, there contains a chapter which is about the lives of Indian physicians, where he talks about how they carry out treatments, how they take care of their patients, how they treat their illness and disease. There are certain references of Indian medical treatises in Ainsley's Materia Medica, and then we find the Indian writers of medicine discussed in Weiss's commentary. They have, though not given much space to the Indian medical systems, however, they have recognized some of the important texts, some of the important methods of medical procedures. Further, the references of medical texts are found in Max Weber's History of Indian Literature, where he talks about, though in literature, but he has certain references of medical texts and he looks for their narrative and healing aspects. Further, we have the commentary by Roth. It's called Monograph on Charak, which provides a kind of systematic understanding and simplistic explanation of Charak's Charak Samhita. The systematic study of medical author and their works are further found in Joly's Medicine in the Encyclopedia of Indo-Aryan Research. And this is one of the first Western texts where we have detailed, systematic, and deep analysis of Indian medical traditions. And then when we look at Harnell's, the commentators of the Susruta Samhita and the ancient Indian medical author, they also elaborate and explain the practices by Susrut. Moving further, while praising the Indian medical traditions, Professor Max Neuberger from the University of Vienna writes that the medicines of Indians, if does not equal the best achievements of their race, at least nearly approaches them, and owing to the wealth of knowledge, depth of speculation, and systematic construction, takes an outstanding position in the history of Oriental medicine. Here, Professor Max Neuberger talks about how Indian medical traditions are one of the best achievements of a human race, best achievements of Indian people, and they provide an in-depth knowledge. They talk about specific medical knowledge about specific disease, specific illness, and then they speculate and they provide systematic construction of how to carry out the medical treatments. And in this way, they are providing one of the best positions in the Eastern medicine, Indian medicine. When we look further, in 1835, the government of India, then the British government, has ordered the printing and publication of Susruta Samhita in its original. But they found that this is a waste of money and it is not worth publishing. So there are like moments where the Western scholars, the British government, who is ruling India then, consider that Indian medical texts do not contain enough resources, enough thoughts, ideas, and materials which can help in treating and healing the sick persons. However, the book Susruta Samhita was later published by the Asiatic Society of Bengal, and it has then drawn the attention of the world around. Susruta talks about that physicians should know multiple sciences. They shouldn't be like knowing only the medical sciences. They should be knowing about so many different sciences. It can be about plants. It can be about physics. It can be about something else. And in this way, we find in Susrut the first interdisciplinary approach where one has to bring out different sources of knowledge and then apply them along with their medical knowledge. We have further study of Indian medical traditions by John Fleming, and it is called the Catalogue of Medical Plants in 1810. Then we have Ainsley's Materia Medica of Hindustan, published in 1813. These two books talk about the Ayurvedic herbal medicines and different plants which can be source of medicines. Then we have Roxburgh's Flora Indica, which talks about the role of medicine and how they can be derived from different sources, including plants and trees and different elements of nature. Why one has to examine the history of Indian medicines and how they contribute in the development of modern medical systems. And what is necessity of knowing the ancient medical traditions, ancient Indian medical systems. The reason is that when we think about a student of theology, and then like she is being taught the history of church. When we think about the history of literature, maybe Hindi or English literature, they study the history of English literature. If they are a student of history of Indian literatures, then they read the history of Indian literatures. The student of law studies the history of law. The reason like why they are necessary and required, because they provide a comprehensive and critical understanding of what they are learning. So history provides them a path, a medium to reflect over, to think over, and then contribute to one's vision in shaping what one is going to do in future. So history is not just the source of the past knowledge, but it also shapes the future knowledge. Hence, when we look at the history of medicine, and then it is necessary for the students of medicine to learn the history of medicine. It has multiple roles. It can be in terms of like shaping the knowledge of one's medical systems, or it can be necessary to understand how medical systems have been developed and how people have been treated and how they have been diagnosed and how they have been cured. Further, it helps someone understand about the human history and development of medical sciences. Moreover, it is necessary to understand the racial peculiarities of disease, the natural classifications of diseases, whether they are caused by certain heredity or some other kind of genetic problems, and then how these diseases have been considered and seen and looked upon in terms of race, in terms of nationality, in terms of their religious practices. And it is necessary to see and then learn these mistakes, that one should not actually practice medical knowledge in terms of any kind of detrimental forces, any kind of detrimental social forces, and it should be available to everyone. In this way, the history of medicine helps in the formation of character. It helps someone to understand and treat their patients in a better way. One of the earliest example of history by a medical practitioner is found by Hippocrates. And Hippocrates has been seen to learn history of medical arts, and he has also learned the history of and the works of his predecessors. The reason is that he is trying to find out how his predecessors and how the former medical practitioners have looked upon their medical cases. In the 17th century, Francis Bacon writes and he comments about the limitations of medical experts in his own time. And he says that the approach of Hippocrates has been discontinued, and which has caused a kind of disruption in the medical service, in disruption in the medical process. Hippocrates used to note down the individual cases of each patient in detail, their history, their treatments, their effects of medicines, and how they are getting cured, how they are treated, and then what are the consequences of post-treatment, consequences of medicine, and then how they get cured, and then how they lead a life. So Hippocrates provides a kind of the complete history of patient, and before, during, and after illness. which can be a kind of which can be a material for future case studies, and it did help the future doctors. But this practice was discontinued and disrupted, which has caused some kind of limitation, some kind of break in the medical traditions. And this is something like necessary to find out how people have been treated, how they have been cured. And in this way, the study of history is necessary and important. Further, one has to learn about the medical nomenclature, terms, treatments, important diseases through history and how they have been diagnosed, treated, and then how different medicines, different healing practices have been carried out. Some of the important Indian works which have great contributions in the development of Indian medical knowledge traditions are Vedas. In Veda, like when we think about Rig Veda, we have different rijas, different hymns, which talks about different modes of healing. And there's a reference of God Rudra, and the line says, "I hear thou art best of physicians, the depository of all sciences, and the professor of healing medicine." After Rig Veda, though I have discussed Veda in one of my first lectures on Indian medical knowledge traditions, however, for the sake of reference, I'll briefly refer them. The second, like Atharva Veda, has been seen as a precursor to modern medicine. And it has been also seen as a precursor to the development of Ayurveda. So Atharva Veda has a lot of suktas, a lot of hymns which talks about different illnesses, different types of treatments, and different ways of healings. In Yajurveda, we have prayer, the references of prayer to God Indra for health and healing. Sushrut Samhita, which I will talk in detail little later, is one of the very important and very rational text about Indian medical knowledge traditions. When we think about Veda, they have taken the point of view of divine healing. They have taken the point of view of that some kind of religious approach. But with Sushrut, we have come to the rational aspect of Indian medicines. However, it is not the like a point that after Sushrut Samhita we have all the texts that they take up the health and illness from rational point of view. There are different texts, for example, Devi Puran, Mudra Rakshasa, Hitopadesh, who talk about different types of illnesses, some of them caused by Vishkanya or poison girl, which are like referred in the time of kings and queens when they used to send a lady to the king, and when they come in contact with the king, they can get the poison from the lady and then die. These references have been made by Charak and so many other rulers and maybe their advisors. Then we have other important texts by Agnivesha. And when we look at Agnivesha's Tantra, it talks about like the medical conditions of illness and healing from the point of view of both rational and religious aspects. Then we have Bhela Samhita, and who is one of the disciples of Punarvasu Atreya. And by the time of Vela, the Samhita of Charak and Sushrut have been undergone revisions, and there is maybe like there are some kind of additions, some kind of changes in Sushrut and Charak Samhita. So this marks a kind of like a timeline for Sushrut and Charak. Vela Samhita discusses different types of Nidan, Biman, Sarira, Indriya, Chikitsa, Kalpa, Sthanas, and which are meant for like complete healing and well-being of humankind. Then there is a reference of Jatukarna, who is one of the 6 disciples of Punarvasu Atreya, and his treatise is Jatukarna Samhita. Further, we have Jatukarna II, who is a disciple of Punarvasu Atreya, who wrote Jatukarna Samhita. And further, we have Charpani, a disciple of again Punarvasu Atreya. So like what we notice over here, that Punarvasu Atreya is one of the great medical practitioner and teacher who has many disciples who are carrying out his legacy. And Charpani wrote Charpani Tantra. Then we have Harita Samhita by Harita. Further, we have texts like Vidya Parasar, who wrote Parasar Samhita. With Parasar Samhita, we find one of the original author of medical texts, and which have become useful for Vedic students and teachers. Then we are having Parasar II, a disciple of Punarvasu Atreya, who wrote Parasar Samhita again. So what we find over here, that there are multiple disciples of Punarvasu, and how he has developed a tradition of medical system, how he has developed a number of his disciples who can carry out his method of medical practices. Then we have Sushrut Samhita by Sushrut. I'll discuss it. I have a separate lecture on Sushrut Samhita. Then we have Pushkal Lavta, and who wrote one of the earliest treatise on surgery. Then we have Charak, who wrote Charak Samhita, and where we have a detailed study of different types of diseases, different types of treatments and healing practices. Then Vikshu Atreya, and who wrote Atri Samhita, who is a teacher of Jivak. Jivak is a personal doctor of Buddha. Then we have Kashyap, who is a toxologist in Mahabharata, and who talks about the health conditions of women and children. Then we have Jivak, who is Buddha's physician. Then we have Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, which talks about different types of health conditions. And then Nagarjuna. Though Nagarjuna didn't write any kind of medical treatise, but his philosophical texts do have references of medical practices. Moving further, when we think about Charak Samhita by Charak, it is one of the very, very important texts in the entire Indian medical tradition, particularly in the Ayurvedic traditions. Charak's compendium has 120 chapters, which is divided into 8 parts. And number 1, it's called Sutra, which deals with pharmacology, food, the types of food, diet, diseases and their treatments, physicians, good physicians, bad physicians, and various topics in philosophy. Then second part is Nidan. Nidan means treatments. So it talks about the causes of 8 main diseases and how they are treated, how they are cured. Then Vimana. It talks about about the topics such as taste, nourishment, general pathology, and medical studies, where it focuses on how to acquire knowledge and carry forward it in the future. Sarira. It talks about anatomy, embryology, philosophy, and different types of practices to examine the body. Then Indriya, which talks about diagnosis and prognosis. Chikitsa, it's about therapy. Then Kalpa, which is about pharmacy, which is about the creation of drugs and medicines, making of drugs and medicines. Then Siddhi, which is about further general therapy. Then come to Kashyapa's compendium. And Kashyapa's compendium it deals with the health and disease illness of women and children. Though this work was lost in Sanskrit, but was discovered in Chinese translation, and it was translated by Dharamdev, and it is a part of Chinese Buddhist Tripitaka. It deals with particularly the issue of miscarriage. However, it examines miscarriage from the religious and mythic point of view. This book deals with the story of Prajapati, the father of creatures and creator of the world. And once there was a fight between God and demons. Then goddess Revati, who is known as Lady Opulence, she comes to help God, and then God wins battles. She slaughters the demons. But then she witnesses that demons are escaping to the wombs of human beings and wombs of animals, and then they are getting reborn. And so once like demons are getting rebirth, they are getting reborn. She meets a disease goddess, Jatharini. And the task of Jatharini is to take away the newborns. And hence, anyone like who is born, like the demon like who are born through animals and human beings, and then they are killed by Jatharini. Further, anyone like who are any children who are born from bad parents, they are also killed by this figure. We have references of Revati, Lady Opulence, though briefly in Sushruta Compendium, and where she has been seen as one of 9 grahas, and her task is to kill the children of evil parents. So to conclude, we have witnessed that there are a large number of medical texts in India which needs to be traced, studied, translated, documented, and made available to the public. There is a need of rewriting Indian history of medicine, which can actually shape, which can provide a new perspective to the medical practices in India. Further, we need commentaries and explanations of these Sanskrit texts, and we need to provide some of the commentaries, some of the like explanations, and then maybe rewrite and explain and look at the errors in the translation. There are multiple versions of, sometimes like when we look at Sushruta Samhita or maybe Charak Samhita, and they need to be corrected, examined, and studied. There is also a need of the comparative study of different Indian medical texts, and then find out their merits and demerits. And with this, I end over here. Thank you.